and also leave a lot of time for question and answers. So without further ado, I guess I'm just going to offer my official good evening. It's great to have you here, even though I can't see your faces, hoping that someday before too long we can be face to face again. It's just a lot more fun, and there's usually cookies involved or something, which is nice. But we are really glad that you could join us virtually. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's really important to us to be able to share this and to also to hear from you when you have questions and you need answers. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet, I'm Heather Cook, and I'm the Planning and Development Manager for the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. I also get to manage this project with a great team of professionals and a longstanding relationship with the city of Milwaukee. Before I get started, I'm going to jump right in, but I just want to introduce the people who are on screen with me, starting with our NCPRD Director, Mike Bork, if you could give us a wave. Hi, Mike.
Hello, thanks for everybody being here.
And we also have our project landscape architect with us, Jonathan Beaver from Two Ink Studio Landscape Architecture.
Hey all, nice to see you.
Hey, Jonathan, welcome. We also have Amber from the Clackamas County Communications and Engagement Office. She is actually the magical person who's making this all work. I can claim no credit, so thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you. Hello.
And we also have Melina DiFrancesco. She's our marketing communications manager. She's actually part of the magic that makes this all happen also. I shouldn't have left her out of that, but she is also going to be rounding up questions for us tonight. And I just want to pitch it over to her for a minute to let you know how that's going to work.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So following the presentation, we'll be answering questions that have already been submitted through email and on social media. And then after that, we'll be opening it up to live Q&A. So please put any questions that you may have in the Q&A box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. And you can enter questions at any time throughout the presentation, and we'll answer them at the end.
Thank you, Melina. And that just reminds me that without the chat function, with that going into hibernation during the main part of the night, if you do have a technical concern, because that happens on Zoom, if you could just put something in the Q&A, because Melina will be tracking that, and she can always interrupt me mid-sentence, mid-word, and we can find out if there's something technically that's not going right. Also, we are recording this session, so I'd like to ask Amber, are we already recording?
Yes, we are live recording.
Okay, so we are recording this session so that we can post it online. A lot of the work that we do tonight will be informational for people who can't attend, and also the questions and answers will be useful for others as well. Okay, so with that, let's jump right in. So tonight, I want to take just a really brief amount of time talking about where we are. We're not going to talk a ton about the history tonight, although we have talked about it in the past, but I really want to dive in and tell you where we are. The bulk of that and the bulk of this presentation is about the design refinement, exactly what we've been doing to the design in this latest effort to bring you this update tonight. And then we'll briefly talk about our next steps. And then I'd like to leave a lot of time to talk about what questions you have and see what answers we can give you right on the spot here tonight. So literally, physically, where we are, this is a district-wide amenity, and it's an amazing place where, you know, we have this riverfront access like nowhere else in the whole North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. It's this amazing site right on the Willamette River and sandwiched in between the river and downtown Milwaukee. As you can see from this diagram, it's also sandwiched, the main part of the park is sandwiched between Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek. So we have even more natural amenities there. And we have things like the existing trolley trail that today brings bikes and pedestrians and other path users through and to the park. We have pedestrian crossings over McLaughlin Boulevard that connect people from the site to the downtown. And that's important, not just because there's people who live downtown and visit downtown, but also because we have the Orange Line that brings people from further flung places and also various bus lines that come into downtown. So the downtown connection is actually helpful for the entire district. We also have 2 parking lots on site, and we have a boat ramp and a boarding dock that lets water traffic come and go from Milwaukie Bay Park. So this is a popular place for boats to put in both motorized and non-motorized boats. So that's physically where we are. And I kind of neglected to mention this maybe more obvious piece is it's right along McLaughlin Boulevard, otherwise known as Oregon 99E. As far as where we are in the process of the project itself, we are really in the most recent phase. Someone on the chat said they were involved back in the 80s, and truly this project does go back to the 70s from what I've learned. And that was a popular time for people to start turning to the rivers. Historically with industry, a lot of people had turned their backs to the rivers. They were dirty, they were often unpleasant. They weren't the sort of recreational amenities we think about today, or even places that were good for habitat. So a lot of work went into just getting to where we are today. In 2015, the city did phase 2 of the park to develop the boat ramp and the parking lots and the Riverside Pathway. But the park was not completed. It's just a very big effort to complete the whole park. So in 2018, we teamed up with the city of Milwaukee to lead the final design effort to complete Milwaukie Bay Park. By 2019, after meeting with many hundreds of people in the community, we presented this final schematic design. And that was basically the blueprint for how we would proceed with a park design. Over the ensuing 2 years, we've been working on funding and other agreements that are necessary to construct the park. So it's a pretty big project with a pretty big price tag, and we want to get it right. So we've been working really hard on those agreements. We are still working on those agreements as we speak. So before we go to construction, we still have some work to do on our agreements. In 2002, we're working on design and pre-construction, which means we're going from this more generalized period of design to a very specific detailed design, so much so that we can get down to drawing construction documents for a contractor to build out in the field. And that's the really exciting thing. If we can get through all these phases in 2022, we'll be ready to construct in 2023. So that's our goal. A lot of things still have to happen, but part of the reason we're showing you this design tonight is that we want you to know our progress, and we want you to see the kind of details we're working with. Just a quick word on our work with the community. For those of you who weren't involved in the phase in 2018-19, we asked the community a lot of questions, and people came out and really wanted to talk about the project. So talking to over 1,300 people at so many different events, we found out things like people wanted to have nature play and a water feature that was more like a nature spray element. People wanted to make sure those were safe and away from the street. People wanted the restroom near those things. It sounds so simple, but those are important things to consider in the design. People wanted a flexible space and an amphitheater, potentially performance space. They also wanted multiple picnic areas. They want shade, they still want shade. People also wanted natural areas and views, as well as inviting entryways and universal access, which is ADA access for people with disabilities, but really trying to create access for people of any ability and any background. So this is a partial list. You can see it's a lot of things. So we're trying to do a lot of things on this site, but we're very committed to meeting the goals of this project whenever possible. So in the design refinement, what we're essentially doing by adding this design detail is we're trying to align our design and what that costs with the funding that we have. There's only so much money for the project, so we have to make sure we design something that's realistic based on the cost today. So right now, Jonathan and his team and our contractor team have been working extremely hard looking at ways to be efficient in the design, maybe how we lay out the pathways, where we cut the slope and where we don't, and also look at cost savings. Are there things we can do with materials? Are there different efficiencies in the way we phase the project that saves money? All of that goes into delivering more for the money that we have. We're also looking at preserving key features and functions. So the main elements, the main program elements of the project, like the playground. We want to make sure we keep those things as much as possible in terms of how they were envisioned. And we also are assuming the current funding plan. So some of you have followed the project closely know that we've been talking about a $9.6 million cost for quite a long time. That's all the construction costs, design costs, basically all the costs of putting this project to its final phase. And we're not changing that. So we're assuming the same funding plan, even as costs fluctuate with the market conditions we have today. So this is really a very diagrammatic look at 2019 design versus today. If you sort of back up and look away, you can see the big chunks are really very much the same. So we still have a large lawn and amphitheater for the flexible space. We have play area, water feature, and restroom. They look just a little bit different because of the design details. And then we keep even what I would say are the maybe lesser known elements like picnic areas and plazas and certainly walkways. So this is what I mean when I say we're trying to make sure we preserve the major features and functions of the park as much as possible. So this diagram is online along with most of these materials, and our whole presentation will be up as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time going over all of the details here, but you can certainly spend a little bit more time with it online. And I know some of you had a chance to look ahead of time, but just a few important features that we'll talk about today. We'll talk about the amphitheater, we'll talk about the play area, the water feature, we'll talk about the trolley trail, and then we'll show you some images that bring in some of the other elements. But a couple of things I wanted to point out that we won't zoom in on quite as much. We have a picnic terrace here that overlooks this area with the beautiful views. You'll see this picnic area depicted in another slide. We have this beautiful entry plaza to really accentuate the major entry to the park across from the Monroe Street entry. We have a restroom, really functional, but also it turns out very beautiful the way it's been designed. We have a loading area, and that's important because I'll talk a little bit later about parking. Parking is a challenge at the site. We want to make sure a loading area helps people get to the park and load and unload to facilitate parking off-site and nearby. So with that, again, we can come back to this later if people have questions. But I did want to emphasize also that part of what has really shaped the design is the intention to bring pathways throughout the site so people can experience the site, and not just people who can navigate steep, uneven grass or hillside. We really wanted to make sure people could experience the site no matter what their mobility, no matter what their speed and agility. So you can see with these drawings, we've worked really hard to create a site plan where the paths are ADA accessible. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. And often we're going beyond that standard as well. There's just one spot with stairs, but there's a way to get around those stairs if you cannot navigate stairs. So this has been a really important part of the project. We know how much people want to walk and run and stroll and get around. And those pathways are a really important way of bringing people to almost every part of the site. Okay, so some of the views that we're going to look at here in the subsequent slides, hopefully the pictures will tell will be worth 1,000 words, and I won't have to say quite as much. But one of the first view we'll look at is the amphitheater looking out toward the river. The second one we'll look at is the playground. We'll be looking uphill. The third one we'll look at is the water feature. So we'll look at the water feature from this north down toward the south. You probably even can see the restroom in the background. So this first view is the amphitheater. This is a representation of what the amphitheater would look like based on the design. And you can see in this picture, this is really where we have the grass on the site. This is where we have a stage for performances, or it becomes a platform during times when there isn't a performance. In general, it just becomes a large, flexible gathering space, but also an event space. So whether it's a concert or a movie or a performance of some kind or a festival, this ends up being a really nice, flexible space. And even though this is not a true representative design, this is the location of the fire pit. So this would be a special event. People have asked about, whether they could come use this every day. This would be for special events because it has a certain amount of risk, but that fire pit is kind of a tradition on the site and something we wanted to incorporate. And you start to get a sense in this picture of the way the pathways meander through the site and how that helps people navigate. So the second thing I wanted to show you is the play area. The play area has nature play, climbing type structure envisioned. That's in this large zone here. Also has a more motion-oriented play element. This is, in this case, a multi-person seesaw type piece of play equipment. We also have slides, which is not uncommon in a park, but part of the reason they're here in particular is because this site has a lot of slope, and the slides basically make fun of the slopes that we have. So instead of trying to design around the slope and it being really tricky, we're trying to incorporate slides to make the slope of the site really fun. And that could look like a couple different things. I'll show you in the perspective a little bit more detail. We also have things like, potentially incorporating some instruments that are fun for kids, or some places where we can plant willow tunnels for kids to explore in. So you can see those can all be on different parts of the site. And as you'll see in the next diagram, those different areas that we were showing, they're all at different levels in the park. Again, because there's a lot of slope on the site, you'd have kind of an upper, middle, and lower play area all connected in different ways. And this depiction shows a slide that's covered and a slide that's uncovered, a big slide, a small slide, and again, the different kinds of play equipment. Part of what's represented here also are some boulders with the feedback that we've had from people and from other park projects where kids really like to scramble on the boulders, that they become a play element and they become a very natural play element. So we're looking at ways to incorporate boulders to give kids in particular ways to scramble around and play around a bit like you would in a more natural environment. Oh, and I'll just throw this in here because someone had mentioned it in the questions that we received online. This play area surface that's being depicted is a rubberized play surfacing, and it's actually it actually comes in mats in blocks, which is terrific because if one gets damaged or worn out, you can just replace that block. And it's to provide a safe playground surface as required by national standards. So the water feature area, again, kind of hard to get a sense for it in this view, kind of bird's eye view and a plan view, but you can see it's close to the play area, it's close to the restroom, but it's still removed from the plaza, especially because it's a little bit down the hill. This is a ramp coming down here. So this is a sense of what it would look like with some boulders for sitting, some spray that comes up from the pavement, some type of seating for people to enjoy being around it, and just generally a great place for people to play and cool off. And this is a depiction, again, we were looking south. So you can see that restroom building is in the background, and even you can see this little roof structure. That's a picnic trellis over the picnic area for some shade. So giving you an idea of how all these elements fit together. You can see the play, the river, the amphitheater, this close by picnic area. So trying to weave a lot of things together pretty tightly together on a site. And then finally, the other feature I wanted to zoom in on was our trolley trail. As many of you know, we already have some pathways going through that constitute the trolley trail, but we're looking at improvements to make the trolley trail safer and easier to navigate. And mostly that's by providing a wider and straighter pathway with much clearer signals about who goes where. So we're trying to work on a design and materials that really give pedestrians and cyclists the signal of where they are to be safe. So these are some examples down below of different types of arrangements that you can see in different places. Some paths don't separate, some paths do. So we're kind of working on those design details right now. And then this just gives you a sense of how much wider the pathways are going to be. So the existing sidewalk at the north end is under 8 feet, which is pretty narrow for cyclists and pedestrians, sometimes can cause some conflicts and safety concerns. And in some places, we do have some wider sections, but not throughout. So this new proposal is to have a 14-foot wide path that has room for pedestrians and room for bikes and much less chance to not present conflicts. Okay, so next steps. We're in this phase right now. We call it design development. We're referring to it today as refining the design. Basically, what we do at this stage is we design and then we get a cost. And then we see how close we get. And then we design again and we get a cost. And we do that sort of iterative process to keep getting the design to target the budget that we have. And in that process, we're really working hard to get the most for our money. So this is really the kind of design period we're in and why we wanted to keep you up to date of how we're updating the design. From the summer on through the fall, we'll be moving into the more technical detail of construction documents. So that's when we take the design and we start translating it so we can hand those papers to someone and have them come build it. We also have to do cost estimates again through that process and begin getting approvals from different agencies, including the city. We continue to get permits and approvals. Governing bodies have to sign off on several levels of approval. So we do that throughout the winter, ideally, which would ready us for construction in the spring. So you can see, even though there's still a lot of steps, we're really just continuing to work on finalizing the design so that we can move forward into construction. And with that, we wanted to address a few questions. We did have a kind of some common themes come up in the questions. So I wanted to address these first and then have a chance for you to ask other questions or even elaborations on these questions. So before I turn it over to Melina, I did want to just talk a little bit about some of these basic questions. And people ask these in different ways, but I'm going to try my best to give succinct answers for all of these major questions. So one was about adding a skate park. And we have had that feedback at different times in the project. This particular site really didn't have the room for a skate park. However, it is something that we want to continue thinking about as a district. So when we continue on in the coming year with a process to identify district-wide needs and what we're going to do for the future of NCPRD, that's exactly the kind of feedback we want, so we can figure out where could a potential skate park go? Where would it fit? You know, how could it be paid for, et cetera? But we didn't have room at this site for a skate park. There's another question about what is the proposed safety surfacing? So a rubberized tile, as I mentioned in the presentation, that is the safety surfacing for the playground. Pretty common surfacing. Question to add more variety to the playground. Can we add more variety? Nothing is set in stone, but we propose these elements because they fit within the areas that we have, that we can carve out for flat surfaces. And I can, we can elaborate further on this with Jonathan later if need be. We have looked at whether something like a dish swing might fit somewhere as well in lieu of another element. I would say the one thing that we have to be mindful of, sometimes it can look like there's room for a lot more, but we have to create these zones for falling. They're called fall zones. So we can't just put a bunch of things in one area without making sure we have a fall zone. But I think there is, we're just trying to dial in those play options. So certainly if you have more questions on that tonight, please let us know. What is being done to deter geese? That's a great question. Geese have historically enjoyed this site, to say the least, and they're not altogether unpleasant as visitors, but the longer they stay, honestly, the more they poop. So, and they can be aggressive. So we're trying to deter geese as much as possible. That's part of the reason that today it's just open grass, because that was what was built temporarily. But in this design, we limit the grass and we really increase the more dense, more natural vegetation, which is not what the geese are looking for. We're also integrating some things like fencing, low fencing that's really designed to keep geese out. And it's part of the reason on the site we have a nice big vegetated area, a swale down at the bottom of the amphitheater. It just gives geese a little bit more of a barrier before they can just go into the amphitheater to have their grass salad bar. Okay, another question was, is the water feature costed for recirculating or drain to waste? So if anyone knows water features, you might know that a recirculating feature, you might know the Lovejoy Fountain in Portland, that has a recirculating system. Many systems drain to waste. It just means it's like your tap, you turn it on and it goes down the drain. The recirculating system is not what we chose here, mostly because of technical complexity and expense for maintenance. So we are planning to drain to the sanitary sewer in this case. Okay, what have I missed? What are the materials of the slides and how safe are the rock formations? The material of the slide that's specified right now is a metal slide. And Jonathan, if I have is it stainless? Stainless steel. And the rock formations, they are designed for scramble and play. There's precedent for how the rocks are aligned. What you're seeing with the boulders on the site today is not exactly what we will build, but it's the kind of first cut at how we might arrange some of those boulders. We have to make sure that they're safe and comply with the national safety guidelines. So by the time they go in, they will certainly be deemed safe. Okay, will anything be done about sight lines at the Trolley Trail Harrison intersection? And I'm going to take a minute just to go back because I don't know if everyone knows exactly what that intersection is. So give me a moment to get back there. This is the intersection of Harrison and the Trolley Trail. It is actually outside of our project area, and so we aren't changing the sight lines there. That is historically an area that is managed between the city and the Oregon Department of Transportation. So any potential improvements in the future would be between those jurisdictions. Okay, now I gotta get all the way back there, make you guys all dizzy. Okay, which direction are the cut sections facing? So again, we're not touching that intersection, so we're not cutting, we don't have any new cuts. Okay, finally, I left this one for last because I have a slide on this. What are the plans to increase parking? Right now, we are not increasing parking at the park. We have 3.5 acres that's been designated for park instead of parking. What we do have are the 38 spots in these 2 lots that were built in 2015. There's 19 that are vehicular parking spots and 19 for vehicles with trailers. And that was specifically done because of the boat ramp, which you can see just coming off that picture. So they needed to provide vehicle parking with trailer capacity. The rest of the parking is downtown parking, and this is not this is a map that's actually part of a bigger map. So the downtown options can be better seen if you go to www.milwaukeeoregon.gov/parking. That's the city's website on parking. But this slide does give you an idea of the different types of options. All the red you're seeing is 2-hour parking. We see some of the green, that's off-street parking, that's 4-hour parking. And then there's a lot of other parking that's permit parking. And the reason that's relevant is because permit parking gets people off the street that might be working so that there's street parking available for visitors. So you can find out more about the parking by going to that website. There's also a parking management strategy and a staff contact at that website. So I think with that, I would love to open it up and have Melina lead us through addressing some questions.
Great, thanks. So now we're going to begin the live Q&A, selecting questions that weren't previously answered. Again, please enter any questions that you might have in the Q&A box, which again is at the bottom of your screen. If you prefer to speak or if a question goes unanswered, you can also raise your hand. If you're calling from a phone and don't see a raised hand button, you can press *9. And then all questions that come up this evening will be combined and put into a Q&A sheet, which will then be posted online at milwaukeebaypark.org. And then for any additional questions that you may think of afterwards, please do feel free to write us at info@ncprd.com. So far there are 13 questions that have come in. I'm going to start with a question from Brian that was asked early on. The question is, I am legally blind. I am wondering if you are going to add any special railing to the steps area that leads down to the actual river. With my poor sight, I cannot make it all the way down to the bottom to the river. Railing would be very helpful. I put in a request before COVID, but I was told that you didn't have to do it for some reason, but I forget what that reason was.
All right. That was Brian, you said, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Brian. The main reason that we have not addressed that at the park is for this project is that it is technically outside of the scope area. And we have some permitting issues with working in that area below ordinary high water. However, we have talked with the city before about a solution that might work there because we have some limitations on railings because it's an area that's in the floodway. But we have talked about potentially some solutions. So I think that that is something that we could take up again with the city and see what kind of solutions there could be just to provide greater access. And Jonathan, just give me a wave if you want to add anything. I know we haven't had a conversation on that in a while, so I'll wait for your wave on any question. So Brian, I will personally bring that up again.
Great. So next question is from Teresa. So I know we talked about this a little bit, but there's some additional detail asked for. So are there parking spaces, especially wheelchair accessible parking spaces, that have room on one side for a ramp to be deployed? And then also, do the restrooms have ADA defined stalls to accommodate a wheelchair user?
Yes, and yes. And Teresa, I did actually get your question just before this, and I forgot to address it. So thank you for raising it again. Can you see my screen with my cursor? Maybe I can get a head nod from the people on the screen. So hopefully this is the closest ADA spot. There's also some ADA spots in the south parking lot, which is obviously going to be further away. And there's some ADA parking across the street, I believe, in this lot. So this is by far the closest spot, and it has that kind of striped loading area. I should zoom in on this, that kind of striped loading area next to it. So this spot would give you access to sort of what we call the mid-slope walkway. And it means that the route to the restroom would be sort of a switchback up this way. The restroom itself, as designed right now, has 2 stalls, and both are ADA accessible. And actually, one of the things that we've included in those stalls, because we heard from people in the community who are living with disability, we've included some large changing tables in those restrooms, not just changing tables for changing an infant's diaper, but actually larger tables, because sometimes older kids or adults do need assistance in changing, and we wanted to make sure we accommodated that on site.
Great. So now we have 2 questions from Jay. So will the trolley trails route be changed from what it is presently situated, and why if so? And then the second part of that question is, will there be a sufficient number of bike racks provided?
Thank you, Jay. The trolley trail will still go through the site close to this edge, but it will be a slightly different alignment, because today we have basically bikes and pedestrians on a skinny sidewalk, and then they split kind of around here, and then they come back together again on a slightly wider shared path. So we have like 3 or 4 different conditions and different paving and some areas that are just really, really narrow by today's standards. So we will be changing it to this closer to the tree strip alignment, making it a little bit straighter, and then curving it at this entryway. So that was part 1 of the question. I'm sorry, Melina, can you remind me of the second part?
Oh, yes. So will there be a sufficient number of bike racks?
We are putting bike racks at the site. I don't think we've determined the exact number yet, but we have some entities at Clackamas County that have put in bike racks, and I think we haven't quite figured out that number yet. So we'll be putting in, I think, quite a few bike racks to make sure we have enough for people to secure their bikes.
Great. So the next question is from Lisa Lashbrook. Hey, Lisa. So the play area with the 4-seat feature seems fairly empty. Will the design allow for adding future elements?
I think I will, other than sort of some of the opportunities and constraints that we have with the topography and what that means for fall zones, I'd like to pitch this one over to Jonathan to just give his 2 cents, please.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. That's a really great question. As Heather mentioned, one of the real constraints that we have on the site is the topography. So a lot of the green space that you see between the play areas is really sloped areas that are difficult to accommodate additional equipment. That said, we are continuing to look at this area. So I think we'll continue to take any feedback we get in terms of pieces that we think might be appropriate in here. If we were able to add an additional piece in here, I think it would have to be a much smaller piece than what we're showing currently. But as Heather mentioned, this is still a work in progress. So we're really open to any ideas that come out of this.
And I will just add to that, if you have experience with play equipment, either in your line of work or because you're just a park user with your kids, grandkids, nephews, nieces, whatever, you know, we have that email, and I'll put it up again at the end, but it's the info@ncprd.com. And we read all those comments, and we'll gather them up for the design team to consider if there's some ideas there that we can incorporate. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. So the next one is from Jill. The photo did not show much shade at the amphitheater. What is the plan for that?
Thank you, Jill. That's a good question. We're trying to strike this balance between providing shade and also preserving views, which have both been the stated goals of the project. So we're trying to plant some trees that will have, you know, larger diameter canopy here is shown to provide greater amounts of shade while still preserving some of these kind of framed views, like out this way and out this way. For the stage itself, typically what would occur is we would have people bring in tents for events, so they create shade for the stage in that way. But right now we have less shade in the amphitheater because we're preserving those views. Jonathan, is there anything else you wanted to add from a plantings perspective that I didn't cover?
No, I think only that this is an area that we're continuing to study, and we're starting to look at these view sheds a little more carefully in our 3D model. And I think any opportunities we have to plant additional trees that don't impact site uses or the view sheds that Heather mentioned, I think we'll definitely be looking at that.
Okay, so next question, also from Jill. In your research, is that enough restrooms for the large area? Seems like there should be another one on the riverside.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. That's a really good question. We're trying to provide restrooms for what we consider sort of the everyday condition, which we expect to be greater than today, but not like a big festival every day. So today on the site, we have a restroom here at the top of the loading area, and that's also ADA accessible, and we'll have 2 in here. So when we do, when we require restrooms for an event, we do some calculations based on the numbers, and 3 restrooms is really the right number for everyday use. But for larger events, we do this at all our parks. We bring in portable toilets just for those events. So we're looking at confirming areas on the site where we can actually stage those portable toilets for events, and that way we don't have to build and maintain a lot of expensive restrooms because they do take a lot of maintenance. So we want to build what we need daily and then bring in portable toilets for the rest. If we have a large event there, you are absolutely right. There are not enough restrooms in the buildings. We absolutely have to require those, whether it's us putting on an event or someone permitting a special use of the park for an event. Thank you for that question. That's a really good question.
Great. And we actually have another one from Jill. Thank you for all these great questions. So the third question is, will there be lighting overhead at the park?
Jonathan, can you speak a little bit to the lighting? Because I think you have a much better handle on that so far than I do.
Yeah, there is lighting throughout the park. The existing lower walkway, I think most of you know, has the lower bollard lighting along that edge that provides lighting. We'll probably continue to do a similar type of lighting elsewhere in the park. And then in addition to that, areas that require some additional safety, like stairs and things like that, will also have lighting that will be part of the stairs and walls of the park. So the park is intended to be lit. The specific fixtures we're still working on. And then there's a lot of existing lighting along McLaughlin that will remain as this project continues forward.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, the existing lighting along the trolley trail, for example, that would remain are sort of decorative lamp posts. So they're not like big highway lights, they're lower lights, better scaled to sort of the pedestrian environment.
That's right.
But Jonathan, can you clarify, because of that lighting, are bollards planned along the trolley trail, the low bollard lighting, or not right now?
Well, we're still looking at the photometrics of the existing lighting to determine if that will be adequate for the trolley trail. I suspect it will be. I think the areas where we'll be adding additional bollard lighting are some of the secondary pathways that take you down into the park.
Okay, thank you for that.
Great. Okay, next question. This one is from Lisa Gunyon-Brinker. Hi. So how much of the nature play area will also be accessible to children of all abilities?
Jonathan, do you want to speak to that one as well?
Sure, yeah. So that's a really great question. We're really working hard on a steep site to provide as much accessibility to the site as possible, to the playground as possible. You will have noticed from the perspective rendering and the plan that the playground does exist on these 3 separate levels. All of those levels are connected together with pathways that are ADA accessible. The surfacing that we've chosen for the equipment, this tile, rubberized tile, is a great surface for people with mobility challenges. So that's part of the plan. And then the equipment that we've chosen for the most part is equipment that is really available for kids of all abilities. So, you know, it's a challenging site, but I think we're working really hard to try to provide access to all the areas of the playground.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Great. So the next one is from Sherry, or Sherry, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Why is it called the trolley trail?
So the trolley trail was mostly built in 2009 and 10, I believe, most segments in that general time frame. And historically, the old trolley went from Portland all the way down the river, right through this site. So the original alignment for that Portland, why am I blanking on the name? Portland Traction Railroad Company, it was called. The original trolley line goes through this site. And so when regional discussions started over 20 years ago about using that old trolley alignment for a trail, the idea got popular very fast, and it took a lot of work with Metro regional government and local entities like NCPRD to make it happen. And even entities like TriMet that built the light rail stations, they played a pivotal role as well. So essentially, the trolley trail is built on the old alignment of the trolley line, and that's how it got its name.
Neat. So the next one is more of a comment. So metal slides will be too hot in the sun. I don't know if you want to address that.
Yeah, Jonathan, we've talked a little bit about it. Do you want to add a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah, that I think it's a really good good comment, something we're very aware of. Part of the reason that we're using metal slides on this versus plastic slides is because of the static charge that's often created from plastic slides. It's actually one of the accessible features of this park. A lot of children that have cochlear ear implants have a really hard time going down slides that are plastic because of that static charge. So we have chosen to go with stainless steel slides on this park, also just for the longevity. What we're trying to do, because the park slope is facing toward the west and to the south, so we do have the challenge of being directed toward the sun. The slide that's facing to the south, we're intending to do that as a covered slide, so it has a cover over a lot of the slide surface. And as part of our tree study, we're going to try to get trees in that area around the slide that provide a lot of shade. And the plan right now is to plant much bigger trees in that area so that we do get some immediate shade relief in that. So we're doing the best we can to try to mitigate that for sure. It's definitely a concern and a challenge, but that is something that we're aware of and are working to mitigate.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks. Okay, another comment, but it's lovely, so I'm going to read it. Not a question, but just got to say, love the play areas. Can't wait for this. Awesome. That's from Jane. Thank you so much, Jane. All right, the next question is from Virginia, and I think this kind of ties in with the cover of the amphitheater. So any design to enable the use of the amphitheater on rainy days?
We don't have a design for a cover at this point. It's not to say that it couldn't be something that comes later, but both because of views and cost, we did not include it in this phase of the design. We did talk quite a bit about it actually at the beginning and have not included it for those reasons. I think we have heard that cover is great in Oregon, and we do know that. There are some picnic shelters at other North Clackamas parks, and I think it's something that when we go to do our needs assessment and our long range plan, we definitely want to learn more about people's preferences for those type of elements so that we can incorporate them perhaps in areas where there's more space and less conflict with other elements.
Great. So the next question is from Jay. So other than a child being under the watchful eye of their parents, what safety precautions will be in place to prevent a child from entering the river? Safety barriers.
What we have done on this site is really try to keep the major play elements up slope. So let me actually come back to, I'm going in the wrong direction. So we've kept these elements kind of high up on the site to middle to both be away from the street and away from the river. So essentially what we're trying to do is put some distance between between kids and the river. And it's true, we do assume that they need to be under a watchful eye in a river environment, just like any river environment. And one thing that we're looking at specifically with the play area, since it's such a draw, is looking at doing some sort of fencing around the play area. And it wouldn't be like solid fencing that someone couldn't go through, but it would be a visual barrier to sort of remind people that the play area is inside that boundary versus outside. Some of the other ways, physical barriers that also provide kind of visual cues is whenever we have these darker green areas, that's when we'll be elaborating on the planting plan for things other than grass. So once we start putting some of that vegetation in, I think it sends a pretty strong signal that there's, like a barrier. It doesn't mean that, you don't have to keep a watchful eye on your kids, but it does give people some cues about that. There is also vegetation on the slope of the hill. So you'd really have to traipse through a lot of vegetation to get down to the river, with the exception of the stone steps. And those are a pretty constrained point of entry. So, we'd want everyone to take caution at the river and be really careful overall.
Great. So a few of these questions fall a little bit outside the scope, but I'm going to ask just in case Heather, you have insights. So the current light watercraft launch area, is it an ADA type launch? And if not, are there any plans to upgrade it? And then the second question about the boat trailer area, are there any plans to create an option for light watercraft users without trailers for extended periods of time longer than 4 hours?
Those are both good questions. Let me take them in turn. The current plan, which is largely encouraged by the Marine Board, who helped finance this work in 2015, is they were really concerned about safety for light watercraft users and potentially putting them in harm's way if they're in this ramp with the motorized launch and pullout. So the intention was to use the loading area as a way to direct people toward the stone steps as a launch. I think we need to study that a little bit more to make sure that that is as accessible as it can be. I think historically, a lot of people, if you can see my cursor, have launched down here. There tends to be kind of a natural beach down here. It's not an altogether bad idea if it wasn't for all the trailers. And I think the biggest concern is for people's safety, not just in launching their craft, because that's an art in itself to get, a light watercraft that's not always super light, into the water. But we need to make sure that people with trailers and motorized boats can actually see over in the rearview mirror, can see smaller, pedestrians and watercraft and not create a safety hazard. So we're going to study this a little bit more in the next phase and look for the best possible solution. We do also have to consult with the Oregon State Marine Board because they do have a say in this. So we'll be working with them. And by we, I mean NCPRD and the city. We have to tackle these things as partners. As far as the parking, there is not a plan to put more parking on the site. So really, it's about finding the parking on site or off site. And the parking on site, when a spot is available, is not limited by time. It's the parking on the street that's limited by time. So we'd be looking at people trying to plan if they're going to have a longer stay at the river. At this point, they'd want to really focus on some probably non-peak times.
Great. So we have another comment from Jill. And it is, there should be shade in the amphitheater, and we would love to see large trees that do not block the river, trunks and foliage above. That's a comment for you, Jonathan and Heather.
Thank you.
And then the last question is from Jay, and I think it's just a point of clarification. So about safety barriers at the river, will there be any railings or actual barriers that prevent children from falling into the river? So along the edge?
No.
So that is the last of the questions. I'm going to look really quick just to make sure there are no hands up again. It doesn't appear so, and I believe that is it.
And you're right on time.
Oh, actually, one more snuck in, so I'm gonna read that really quick if that's okay. It's from Jay, and so is swimming allowed in the river while in the park parameters?
Today, swimming is not prohibited or actively permitted. Sorry, I need to close my door. So they would continue in that fashion. We see people swim there today. We don't monitor swimming, and the city doesn't monitor swimming.
That's it. No more questions.
I guess if there are no more questions, I would also just pitch it to our team to see if anyone had anything that they felt like needed filled in from the comments we already provided.
I just want to say thanks to both Heather and Melina and Jonathan and Amber and all the folks that came out to see the presentation and the nice comments. We are really happy with where we're at this point in the design. Is everything figured out? Absolutely not. Lots of little details, but we appreciate everybody's comments and questions. And Melina, I would only ask if you could maybe go over those ways to have people get in contact with. Oh, some of it's on info@ncprd.com. How about that? The last slide. So thank you to all the staff and all the public that came out to listen to this and get some questions answered. And we hope to see you at the next one.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. And Melina, do you want to recap?
Of how to get in touch with us?
Yeah, is this the main thing? You want people to send emails, right?
Yeah, well, if you aren't already on the newsletter subscriber list for this project, just shoot us an email at info@ncprd.com and we'll go ahead and get you added. And then keep a lookout. We will be putting the presentation along with the summary of questions and answers on the website at milwaukeebaypark.org.
That sounds great. And I think my information is still online as well. So I will say sometimes it's quicker to email info@ncprd because we have staff that does a great job pulling these questions together because oftentimes we can provide an answer that addresses multiple questions. So your best, probably quickest bet is the info@ncprd, but my information should be online as well. Well, for myself as well, I just wanted to say thank you. Like I said at the beginning, I think when most of you were signed on, I really look forward to the time when we can get together in person again and have these conversations in person. I appreciate you guys hanging in with us on a webinar format. It's a little less personal, but I'm just thrilled to see how much everyone engaged and all the good questions. And I just really appreciate your time, taking time out of your busy day to come learn more about the project. So thank you very much, everyone, and wish you all a very good night. Take care.
Thank you.